This section is all about the different types of sampling. A census isn't always the most practical thing. It can take a lot of time, so sometimes we'll take a survey instead. And that's when we collect data from only some members of a population and use that data to draw conclusions and make inferences about the entire population. And a poll is when the data collection is done by asking questions. A sample is the subgroup chosen to provide the data, so a group of people out of the population. So if this is our population, we have all these people we're interested in knowing some information about. Well, I could take some kind of sample, so maybe I can go in here and just pick people at random. Like I could grab them, grab them, grab them, grab them. Okay, so there's my sample because it wouldn't be practicable to survey everybody. So I'm just going to take enough people to where I can make some kind of inference. And then sampling is just the act of selecting a sample, so which is what I just did kind of randomly by circling different groups of those dots. The target population, this is important. When you're doing a study, we want to know who are we interested in. So we got to distinguish the population for which the survey applies to. If I were, for example, gathering opinion about a certain law in North Carolina, well, I wouldn't go to the people of New York or Tennessee to take a sample for that. That wouldn't make any sense. So I'm interested in the people of North Carolina if it's something about North Carolina. And the next, the sampling frame, the actual subset of the population from which the sample will be drawn. Okay, so here's a few things that can happen with public opinion polls. For one, we can have selection bias, so when the choice of the sample has a built-in tendency to exclude a particular group or characteristics within the population. So, for example, if you wanted to know what a favorite subject is for students at your school was, if you were to go into maybe a creative writing class and ask students in there and take them as a sample, well, that would be a very heavy selection bias because the chances are most students who sign up for creative writing enjoy English, at least to some extent, more than the other subjects. The response rate is just the percentage of respondents, so people that actually reply out of the total sample taken. Non-response bias, this is pretty important. So when the response rate to a survey is low, so you send out a survey to a bunch of people, but you don't get a whole lot back, so you can't make a whole lot of conclusions about that. And that's typically because the people who do respond back in such a low number are people who have very strong opinions, so either maybe very, very negative or very, very positive opinions. Polls can be a really good way of collecting information, but sometimes they're really not that reliable. If you kept up with the 2016 presidential election, it was expected that Hillary Clinton would have a pretty comfortable lead in the electoral votes by the end of the night and win the presidency. But then on election day, Donald Trump did end up with the majority of the electoral votes and became the president-elect. So with polls, you really never know. With convenient sampling, basically who's ever doing the survey is just doing what is easiest for them to collect data. So an example for this is if we have interviewers set up at a fixed location, so like a mall or outside of a supermarket, and they just sit there all day and ask people who pass by a question about a public opinion poll. So they can't really guarantee that they're getting a lot of diverse people in their sample. And it's really just, it's convenient for them. It's easy because they just have to sit and get people who are willing to give them answers. So not usually going to get the best data, but it is an easy way to collect samples. Quota sampling. This is a systematic effort to force the sample to be representative of a given population through the use of quotas. So The sample should have, for example, so many women, so many men, so many African Americans, so many Caucasian, maybe so many Hispanic, so many Asian, and then we look at people living in urban areas, people living in rural areas, people of high income, people of low income. So mainly used to help us feel like we're getting a fair representation from different areas. One of the most important things to understand here about sampling is you have to be really careful about what you read and what you hear. Um, People, corporations, different groups try to use statistics to persuade people one way or the other. And sometimes statistics are just made up on the spot, or they're highly exaggerated to try to prove a point. So, maybe one toothpaste brand says 4 out of 5 dentists prefer this toothpaste. Well, which dentist do they sample there? People who prefer Windows to OS X. So who are we asking about that? The poll where maybe it says 48% want Obamacare repealed. Again, who did we ask? It's important to know these things before we can come to any conclusions.